Mr. President, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this colloquy with Senator Daines and Senator Capito, who is also here with us today. I spent 8 years as governor of South Dakota, and one of the titles which you carry when you are the governor of a state is that you are also the head of the National Guard. You are the chief of the National Guard, and you get a chance to actually work as the commander-in-chief with those individuals who put themselves in harm's way. And when you start out, you wonder whether this is simply just a term of art and whether or not it's simply one of those nice titles. But during the time that I was governor, it was a case in which we literally were sending young men and women off to do battle for the United States of America. They were volunteering, and they were stepping up. They were leaving, hoping to come home. Moms and dads were worried, and with just cause. And at the same time, when they did come home, we would celebrate their safe return, but in some cases, we also mourned with moms and dads because their loved one did not make it home. They gave everything, and yet there seems to be some miscommunication here within the Senate that somehow our actions aren't communicated in a way that harms or that is impacting what those young people who put themselves in harm's way see. Think about this: as the United States Senate, you would think that Republicans and Democrats would put some things aside, and I do believe that we will eventually do that. But there's nothing wrong, I think, with those of us who believe that we should expedite the process of bringing the Defense Appropriations Bill to the floor of the Senate. We shouldn't bring attention to the fact that that's not being done today, and that it's not being done in an appropriate fashion, and that it's not being done in a timely fashion. And that in itself sends a message to a lot of young men and women who put themselves in harm's way and who have already committed themselves to the defense of our country. You know, it was just this last Sunday we marked the 15th anniversary of the bombings that we refer to as 9/11, and the terror attacks, which, well, they took nearly 3,000 American lives, and that occurred in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. These attacks 15 years ago were perpetrated by terrorists whose sole goal was to terrorize American citizens and destroy our way of life. 15 years later, that risk and that threat have not gone away. Number one responsibility of the federal government is the defense of our country. And unless that responsibility is fulfilled, our freedoms are in jeopardy. Yet at this time, we in the Senate have been unable to consider legislation, and I mean only consider legislation, not pass it, simply consider it, in which we can bring it onto the floor the way that the Founding Fathers wanted, and to debate how to make it better. We know we will pass a defense appropriations bill, but the question of how we do it and in what order we do it is important. And whether or not we're prepared to come onto the floor of the Senate, Republicans and Democrats alike, and actually discuss openly the appropriations process, I think is very important. Yet at this time, we in the Senate have not been able to even consider the legislation which funds our troops and our military operations for the upcoming year. Our Democrat colleagues on the other side of the aisle are refusing to even bring the Department of Defense Appropriations Act to the floor so that we can debate and amend legislation that will equip our armed forces with the tools they need to continue their missions. It's one thing if bringing it to the floor meant that it would pass with a majority vote. That's not what it means. What it means is that it takes still 60 votes, meaning Democrats still have the opportunity, if they disagree with what we finally end up with, to be able to stop it from moving forward. But you have to start someplace. And starting with the Defense Appropriations Bill is very appropriate. This is not a controversial bill. The Senate Appropriations Committee unanimously approved it by a vote of 30-0 earlier this year. The Department of Defense Appropriations Act, which passed the committee, also adheres to the bipartisan budget agreement that was signed into law last year, and it refrains from any gimmicks and other controversial measures. Simply put, there is no excuse for continuing to block 6 times now, 6 times to have the Defense Appropriations Bill blocked from even being considered on the floor of the Senate. This senseless obstructionism from the other side of the aisle comes at a time in which, according to a recent Fox News poll, a record high 54% of American voters believe that the United States is less safe now than it was before the 9/11 attacks. Continuing to block any appropriations bill is ill-advised. But blocking the defense appropriations bill causes unnecessary uncertainty and endangers our national security efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the reasons why we created a Constitution in the first place was because our founding fathers wanted to provide for the common defense. And that's what this is all about. It should not be blocked from even having a debate. I would encourage our friends on the other side of the aisle to join us in recommitting ourselves to the primary purpose of government, defending our great nation from those who seek to destroy us, by at least allowing us to debate the merits of the appropriations bill for the defense of our country on the floor of the Senate. Senator Daines, I most certainly appreciate your taking the time to organize this colloquy, and I most certainly appreciate my other fellow freshman senators in stepping up, because this is an important item which I think should bind us together and not separate us here within the Senate. And I thank you for this opportunity to express my thoughts.
Senator Rounds.